This is going to be a panel discussing on climate, technology, and European champions. Until what time do we have, since we are half an hour late? 11 o'clock? We had 45 minutes? Yes. Good. So we have until 11. We will try to make that as interactive as possible, so we will probably take 1 or 2 rounds of questions, so be aware, it's not going to be just at the end, the last few minutes. Just to set you a bit the stage. Europe, and France in particular, has been leading. Everybody knows how important the Paris Climate Accord 2015 was, COP21. We know it's the continent and the political body that was the first to set a net zero target in 2050. So we are really leading the way on that, and as you know, one of the 3 pillars of the European strategy of the current Commission is the Green Deal, which is focusing 30% of all the investments in Europe. So our continent is doing great. There is a but. Our energy transition currently is heavily dependent, and we heard about resilience, and I like very much Olivier's speech, I don't know if he's here, on the resilience, on the supply chain, on the fact that we're in a new type of economy, more in symbiosis. 70% of our batteries are already produced in China. Tendency like that. 99.6% of our solar panels come from China. In a more subtle way, lithium that we will need for electrical mobility in particular, only 4% of it is recycled. So when he did a call to an extractive economy to more symbiosis economy, a generative economy that lives in accordance with nature, you can ask yourself, are we doing enough? My name is André Lezeroux-Pietri. I have a fantastic panel to talk about that. You all know their bios, so they will not introduce their CVs, but they will tell us each what do they do concretely in climate to do a first round. It's a discussion, so please no statements. I know it's filmed, but please no BS, no political correctness. We're here to make the discussion as interactive as possible. So starting maybe with here Valérie Gombard from Highnov, which is an investment fund, we can call it like that, linked with the D'Entressangle group. Julien de Normandie, who has a very long career despite looking as one of the youngest on this panel, who is the chief impact officer of SWEEP. He will tell us a bit about more. Léa Goldfarb, who is an environmental impact officer at Platform. She will tell us. And Olivier Zrati, who is completely an unidentified object, an entrepreneur, a thinker, and now he's leading a quantum energy initiative. My name, André Lezeroux-Pietri. I'm running, a few people asked me, so just to give you some sense, I'm running a foundation that is a precursor to your European Agency for Disruptive Innovation. So we fund research projects too risky or too long-term for the private sector. 50% of what the so-called moonshots, 50% of what we do is climate. A few examples. Can we reduce by a factor of 3 the cost of green hydrogen? Today, 96% of hydrogen is gray. Can we do windmills without rare earth? 90% of them refined in China, permanent magnets. Can we detect wildfires in less than 15 minutes? We all know it's not just now a question of Mediterranean regions, it's going to be increasingly a risk for all our continent. So if we detect them early, we avoid the catastrophic consequences of that. All these topics at the intersection of a lot of disciplines, moonshots that we hope can bring the continent back to technology and scientific leadership. But maybe first, starting with you, Valérie, what do you concretely do to fight the climate emergency?
Maybe a few words about what we are doing at Highnov. So we are an early stage digital B2B Series A investors, meaning that we are financing mainly SaaS and PaaS company at very early stage. So less than 1 million in the ARR, basically. So usually the companies are 12 to 15 people, and they are in their 2 to 3 years. And what we have noticed that when you want to do an MVP, you go fast. And to go fast, you don't really care about the technical architecture of your product, of your MVP. So you're taking blocks from everywhere, and you're doing the last coding that you can to go to the MVP. That's one point. The second point, you don't really take care of is what kind of YAS you're going to use and what are the criteria to pick up your YAS. It's usually, I'm going to the one that is free. And it's true that for the 3 first years, a lot of cloud providers do offer the YAS. And you pick up everything that is in the library to go fast to your MVP. And while doing that, the application that you develop is going to be very heavy. And it's going to be heavily energy consumption when being brought to production. So what we have decided about 2 years ago within INOV is that as a Series A investor, if we want to be responsible and climate responsible, we have to help our portfolio companies to think low energy consumption by design of not only the technical architecture, but also the choice of the YAS, and also the way you developed your software. It's okay to use other stacks to go to the MVP, but then I want to have a roadmap of optimization. You can't have forever very heavy tools from the cloud providers into your application. And it's not only a question of sustainability, it's also a financial question, because after the 3 years of free lunch with the YAS, you're receiving the first invoices, and it's going to be heavier and heavier, because the energy consumption and the energy will cost even more year after year. So it's also good for your P&L.
So we'll talk more about how maybe Europe could take that as for cloud. I mean, this is a discussion happening next door, not only trusted, but energy efficient. Julien.
Thank you very much, André. Actually, I used to work with André, I think it was a decade ago, something like that. We used to work on China at that time. I used to be the advisor of a minister, and the name of this minister was Emmanuel Macron. He used to be Minister of Economy at that time. And after that, I continue working on this subject, especially climate. I used to be minister for 5 years, 3 dedicated to housing and 2 dedicated to food and agriculture. And I can tell you that each time you are working about housing issues, about agricultural issues, climate change is in the middle of all the issues, for sure, because it's a part of the problem and a part of the solution at the same time. After this political life, I will say, I decided to join the private sector, and especially a startup named Sweep. So today I am the Chief Impact Officer at this startup Sweep. And what the purpose of this startup is to provide big accounts, corporate and financial institutions with a software, a SaaS software, to monitor, measure, collect, reduce, and check the reduction target you have fixed in terms of carbon reduction and biodiversity reduction. And why this is, according to me, absolutely essential. Just because when you are speaking about climate change, you are speaking about carbon, you are speaking about energy, everything except energy, everything is something a little bit abstract, as we say in France. I mean, we are speaking about carbon, but you cannot see the ton of carbon in the atmosphere. You can feel the consequences of the climate change, but you cannot feel exactly, and you cannot see the ton of carbon. So it's quite difficult to have some political and policy. It's quite difficult to have some policies, internal policies inside private sector, companies, financial institutions, if you are not able to monitor and to fix a target. This is totally essential in any entities. If you are not able to fix a target, if you are not able to fix an objective, and if you are not able to follow the trend which is yours, in terms of achieving your target, then you do not have any credible policy. And when I used to be a minister, I have to admit that most of the time I receive some companies telling me, okay, your new, let's say, regulator framework seems to be very interesting, seems to be very clever and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, we do not have the tools to be sure that we will be able to fix a target and to achieve this target. And speaking about climate, it's totally the case. Maybe you know about the SBTI. You know SBTI, you know it's a kind of initiative to gathering all the companies, putting in place a very clear objective in terms of carbon reduction target. But this initiative at the international level, it's an initiative based on a statement of fixing a target, but not an initiative based on a way to check that every company will achieve this target. But what is the most important? It's not just to make an announcement, to make a statement, it's to be sure that at the end of the day you will achieve your target. So the purpose of this company, SWIP, is a all-in-one platform to manage carbon, biodiversity, and all the environmental metrics with a very EU specificity, which is auditability. Because most of the time we're speaking about the difference between the US and the EU. One of the most important differences is transparency and auditability. And all the new regulation coming into force in a few months or few years in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of climate, are based on auditability. It's a very important point as well.
So when a startup and policy politician come together, when we prepared that panel, you told me what is the punchline to present SWIP. How do you want to present it? It was the Salesforce of sustainability, or
it's quite difficult. I think it was off the record because Salesforce is one of our competitors. So it was totally off
now
the
it's on the record. And I said it, so I take the responsibility.
Because it's a better solution than Salesforce, for sure. But for any private company, both industrial and financial, for sure, between today and a couple of years, you will have to implement inside the company a software managing, collecting, measuring, and checking your target in terms of carbon and biodiversity based on data approach, meaning collecting the data, meaning checking the data, meaning having data auditable, and blah, blah, blah. Just because the extra financial data will become as important as the financial ones are today. And this is the added value we provide for our customers today at SWIP.
Thank you very much, Julien. Leah, please, platform.
Thank you. And thank you to ECA for organizing the day today. And I'm honored to be on this panel with everyone. So my name is Leah Goldfarb. I'm the Environmental Impact Officer at Platform.sh, which is a French startup. My background is in climate science. I was trained in the US. I arrived in France in 2002 for a postdoc. And I quickly became interested in international science policy, what we could do for the environment, biodiversity, climate, which was my background, and working on these issues, and found that indeed, as an American, I can say Europe is the leader in this area. So I've been here ever since and have been working on these issues. Platform.sh is an end-to-end digital solution for those looking to run, build, and scale their websites and applications. And we use a mode strategy. So exactly what Julien was just saying, the first part of mode is M, measure. The O is for optimize, and we can do that through high density cloud computing. We have been audited by a third party to show that our density can be up to 12 times that of a standard Elastic Cloud AWS instance. And then we also enter in a discussion for optimization of energy with our clients through what we offer, which is an application performance monitor and profiler. And that's a really interesting doorway into a discussion about climate and energy efficiency, because we can show them, we can make visible how much resources their code are using, and show them how to reduce that by resolving bottlenecks. And that's a win-win. That's a really interesting discussion to have with a developer, for example, where you can say your application will run faster and you will use less electricity. And we have some case studies on that. And then we talk about the D of mode is deployment, and we also make visible to the clients that by choosing truly low carbon data centers using a location-based strategy that really truly run on low carbon energy, you can reduce your carbon footprint even more. And then the E is educate. And we say that with humility because we're educating ourselves. We are delighted to participate in fora such as this, and also take the opportunity to discuss some of the challenges that we face in this area as well, because we have a long road to go to meet the objectives that Andre was talking about, the Paris Agreement, the Green Deal, and measure and ensure that we are on track.
Yes, and we are definitely not on track. I was reminding, thank you, Leah, yesterday I was coming back from Berlin. The planes are full. Never people have traveled so much. Good for our airlines, but let's remember that in May, June 2020, especially in this country, there was so much discussion about, yes, it's a new world, it's a new society. We have not changed our habits by an order of magnitude. So the importance of obviously science and technologies is even more important. Olivier, that since we're in this pitching room round, I leave a little bit more time, but afterwards we'll try to keep the answers very short. But please, Olivier, tell us everything about the Quantum Energy Initiative.
Okay, so I have been in the digital industry for about 38 years now. I was a developer, I was a marketer, I was a techno screener, writer, teacher in many different fields. And 5 years ago, I started working in the quantum industry. And it's interesting because it's a very new field. It's very mature. I mean, we have different kinds of technologies there, quantum sensing, quantum communication, quantum computing. It's weird. Nobody understands about this, even the specialists. It's a long-term journey. All these products don't work yet at a global scale. And I started working about 4 years ago with a team of researchers based in Grenoble, namely Alexia Ofev from CNRS and Robert Windey, who's from Scotland, but based in Grenoble as well. And we discovered that there was an interest in looking at the energetics of those technologies from a scientific standpoint. And we looked at the Google supremacy experiment that was advertised 4 years ago in October 2019, showing that quantum computing would maybe become a revolution for that respect. I mean, spending less energy to do some computing. And we looked at the details, and we found out that it was not that obvious. And we found out that depending on different technology paths, a quantum computer that would bring some business value to enterprise in the future could be both a big object consuming as much power as a nuclear plant, or a very energy efficient product if it was conceived so. And so when we then compare that kind of potential history with what happened with AI, what happened with blockchain and Bitcoin and other technologies like this, and we found out that most of these technologies, when they were designed, nobody cared about their environmental footprint. And so what we said, what we thought about is, could we do this in another fashion? Could we stop thinking about the footprint of those technologies when they are designed and not when they are put in the market? Thus, the creation of the Quantum Energy Initiative last August. It's very recent, less than a year ago. And we created the community of researchers and industry vendors to look at this in a collaborative way. But, and that makes a connection with this panel, with a strong European leadership. Because we know that neither China or the US probably will be leaders for that respect. And so it makes a lot of sense to gather a lot of scientists and a lot of industry vendors from Europe to create that leadership. And it goes also along with the lines of how do you create standards, how do you create benchmarking tools, and how you move the industry forward. And it's interesting because, well, we started with nothing. We are just a kind of informal NGO at this point in time. We have 300 participants in the community. We have already 30 partners, industry vendor partners, including Microsoft and soon other large vendors. We have a lot of European players there. And so it's interesting to see how you can capture the attention of an industry that is still in the making. And one last one, then we'll answer other questions. Interestingly, the most motivated participants to that community are the young people. Young students, PhD, postdocs, young entrepreneurs, they really want to be in the bandwagon of that initiative.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And this resonates a lot with what has been said with the by design that Valérie was mentioning. But maybe turning again, and no need everybody to answer. Maybe just pick it if you want. Could you give us maybe, Valérie, in your opinion, what is the role of technology to contribute to fight to this climate crisis? I mean, it's interesting to see that we heard Bernard Benamou talking about we need to have a Small Business Act, but too often, and here also let's be very direct, we are talking about mimicking what's happening. We are not using, for example, this sustainability aspect to create artificial intelligence that develops maybe less. I mean, there is no panel without talking about ChatGPT, so I'm going to talk about ChatGPT. The rumor says that one of the reasons they spent $500 million, that was announced 2 or 3 days ago in the last 6 months, is 80% of energy costs. And they seem to have consumed to train, so GPT 3.5, ChatGPT, the power of 6 months of a nuclear plant. So obviously, it's not sustainable if we are going to develop GPTs for every single application. So what has been the most interesting example, and what are we missing maybe in Europe? Maybe these 2 questions to you, Valérie.
Yes, let me pick an example of our portfolio that has been in the news yesterday, which is DeepKey. I guess a lot of us know this company. We had the chance to finance DeepKey in 2015, I think. And at that time, so just to remember what DeepKey is doing, they are offering a SaaS solution, an ESG SaaS solution to the real estate owners so that they can monitor not only the energy consumption, but also the water consumption and so on of their building without any IoT captors and so on that nobody wants to pay for or to install, just with data. This is what they are doing. So 7 years ago, when they started as a spin-off of Engie, and by the way, Engie didn't want to finance the technology because they were an energy vendor, and they said to the 2 engineers, Vincent Briand and Emmanuel Blanchet, that's a nice idea, but we want to sell that software to our customers. So we have an incubator here in Engie, and go to the incubator. We finance your wages for a year, and then good luck to you. And we finance DeepKey right after they get outside of the Engie incubator. So that's the story. And at the very beginning, they were selling the solution to CFOs. Why to CFOs? Because they said, look, if you can decrease your energy consumption the first year by 10%, it's 10% of cutoff on your bill. And the growth was okay, but not fantastic, you know. And then there were the COVID coming, and the awareness of the global warming really raising like crazy. And right after COVID, the regulation came from the UK and from the European Commission. And the regulation is very tough. The regulation is by the end of 2024, so it's tomorrow. No real estate owner will be able to rent any building to any person or to any enterprise if this building is not rated with a good rate in terms of energy consumption.
Is this regulation really going to happen?
It will. It will.
It going to
Believe me, it will.
Is it really going? But you know, we often have these targets, but when then we don't have a pathway to it, they become or even create political problems. So, how much do you see that being really implemented? Do we have the solutions?
It is implemented. It is serious. It is serious regulation. They have no choice anymore because the real estate industry is responsible for 30% of the carbon emission. That's equivalent to the transportation industry. That's huge. And it's not only building the building, but it's also all the exploitation afterwards. And when the so it was about 2 years ago when the regulation came, the growth became like rockets. So I have a company that became a worldwide leader in 3 years. And today...
Maybe we can move on just to keep it a bit more crisp.
Sure.
Maybe, Julien, you have an example, maybe outside of sweep, that you have seen either in your political career or of really technological solution that can completely be game changers from a European point of view?
I can give you some example, but just before, because what you have said is totally and absolutely essential. I know very well DeepKey. I'm so sorry, DeepKey is also a competitor. But I know very well Deepke as well, because I was the minister when we decided to implement this regulation just mentioned. What is very important to have in mind is, for a decade or 4 years, we have said, many people, thanks to the climate change, thanks to the solution, it will be possible to find a way to be more profitable. The return on investment regarding investing, all the investment you could make in the field of environment could be profitable at the end of the day. And in the real estate sector, it was particularly pointed out. How many people have listened, you know, please make all the works inside your house to prevent from any carbon emission, energy emission, and blah, blah, blah. And thanks to that, you will be able to save money. And then you have the banking sector proposing some dedicated loan to the real estate works and blah, blah, blah. But what is the reality? It will be profitable in a period of 20 years. In average, in France, you stay 8.5 years in your flat. What does it mean? Why I am mentioning that is, when you are speaking about efficiency, carbon emission, climate, you have to count on innovation to find the best way to make the changes. But at the end of the day, we have to accept that we need to change our own behavior without a return on investment positive. And this is very, very, very important. What is the most missing point, according to me, is in the financial sector. I don't know if you know the CDP, Carbon Disclosure Project, which is a big entity giving some data. One of the last data points given by CDP is about how many, they made an assessment on, if I am right, it was 27,000 of billions of dollars. 27,000 of billions of dollars. Assessing all the assets under management by private equity funds, banking sectors, financial institutions. And they compare those total amount of money with the objective of the Paris Climate Agreement mentioned by André earlier. On those 27,000 billions of dollars, less than 1% was aligned with the goal of the Paris Climate Agreement. Why? Just because it was not profitable to do so. So I think what is the best innovation we have to put in place is to accept to change something in our model in terms of assessing the value of any assets. If the value of any asset is only based on ROI, return on investment, but not on ROII, return on investment plus on impact, then we will not achieve to do anything. So to have some innovation, it's so important. And in the agricultural field, for instance, I have so many examples explaining how, thanks to the innovation, I've called it, when I used to be a minister, the third agricultural revolution, to prevent from pesticides, to prevent from carbon emission, to prevent from fertilizer, and blah, blah, blah. But the most important evolution and innovation we have to put, to push, is the fact that we need to accept a change of the way of valuation of the assets, for sure.
Maybe turning to Olivier. Julien, here we are both staggered by this number. It's, pessimism could come into this room because 1% is not a lot. Two questions to you, Olivier, and that's a perfect segue to the regulation part. Bill Gates calls that the green premium. Is that actually a lot of investments or innovation that lead to better impact are more expensive and our return on investment on more than 20 years. So do you think what should be the European response? Because there's no really a European response yet to what has been decided a couple of months ago in the US, the famous Inflation Reduction Act, which is a super simple subsidy for investments which have a positive, sustainable impact, provided that, of course, that they are developed in the US. Should we do the same? Is it something that is applicable to innovation and technology? How do you assess?
I will surprise you. I have no idea. I want to respond to the other question because, that's the way I do. So I want to respond to the other question. Can technology bring some solution? The answer is yes, I would say, but we have to change our behavior for one good reason. Most of the technology solutions that can help solve climate change are long-term. So I know a couple of ones. Nuclear fusion. We know nuclear fusion is not going to show up before the next 50 years. Quantum computing, the same. It's my field. I know it's going to take a long time before it can help. Not in the way I'm managing that's part of the QEI, but in the solutions it can bring. It will take some time. Even inventing a new battery, even inventing a new process to create a fertilizer, which is some of the dreams people are talking about with quantum computing. All those dreams, all those technologies are long-term. It takes at least 20 years to be deployed, and we have to fix the climate change before. So it's two parallel paths, I would say. We have one path which is change our behavior, fly less, whatever you call it.
And are we on the right path to change the behaviors?
No, we know it's
no. So give it, it's good to say change behaviors, but it's not happening. So what would you recommend?
Well, it's probably about regulations and taxations and whatever, because you change the behavior with incentives wherever you go. It can be local, at the regional or country level. It can be global, with a lot of COP discussions going on. But we have to change that. And it's just interesting because I've got a personal experience. I changed my house recently. Reshaped it to put some isolation. I looked at the ROI, the potential ROI. When I look at the math, the ROI was about 60 years. So there's no ROI. But I do that because I know...
Disclosure, Olivier has a very big house.
I've got a house. So, but it costs a lot. But for the sake of being a good citizen, I do it. And there's no tax incentive for me to do that. I just do it. But one reason is I can afford doing that. Other people can't afford necessarily. So you have to find good ways to manage this. But we still have to bring some hope with long-term investments in technology. We shouldn't abandon that, but we should understand that this is not the short-term solution that we need. That's mine. So I'm not a techno-solutionist.
You wanted to come in.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. So just on digitalization and what Europe can do. So if we look at the IPCC, and this is where I worked last before coming to Platform SH, in the working group 3, they say that digitalization has its role to play in reducing emissions. And as we know, we need to do it now. And they clearly said that there'll need to be some regulations about that. And I want to just talk a little bit more about the regulations from a startup point of view on this. If we work in that space of reducing emissions and we change people's behavior, at least in the cloud, to go away from on-premises to the cloud, really work to reduce their emissions, as a startup, our emissions go up in total. So we're no longer compatible with Paris agreements and all the rest. And so it's kind of interesting to think, and you could expand this out to wind farms and all the rest. Will there be a laissez-passer for people working in the low-carbon field? Or do we have to apply?
Basically, the question Leah is asking is for those entities that are helping others to scale, that will themselves have... It reminds a little bit on the very difficult discussion you have with what people call the Global South, saying, okay, you are working on your emissions in Europe, but you exported offshore all your dirty production. It's a very difficult, even moral, this discussion to have. And what do you see that policymakers are responsive to this? To De se laisser passer?
This is the first time I'm voicing this question, so I haven't heard the response yet, but I think it's a really interesting discussion because we want to be responsible world citizens, just as you say. We know we have to reduce our total emissions. We know that the Paris Agreement is based on sound science, and so it's how we get there together and do that in a just and equitable way. But I think the discussion needs to happen for the entire sector making the transition, how to energize that.
I would like to thank André because the question he has asked is, for me, the most important one. I think Olivier Liancy, during the introduction, mentioned the WTO world and the fact that today we have to reinvent this WTO world. The WTO world is always based and still based on the David Ricardo theory. Do you know this theory? You know this comparative advantages theory, meaning that if you can produce cheaper in one place in the world, then let's produce it and you will import and blah, blah, blah. This is the basement of the liberalism. But what is the most concern about this theory is that has been published at the early stage of the 19th century, and at that time, all the environmental issues didn't exist. But the point is that today, all the liberalism doesn't include so far the environmental issue. What does it mean? If you have any agreement today, you can import, export, whatever you want without any environmental price included in the exchange. The first time we start to change it will begin in a couple of months thanks to the border carbon tax voted at the EU level. It was the first time. 2 weeks ago, I went to Brasilia to make an assessment about the way Brazilian people they have to cultivate wheat, soja, beef, and blah, blah, blah. This is totally crazy. 50 years ago, Brazil was an importer of all the foods. Today, Brazil is the first exporter of wheat, soja, the second of cotton, the first of beef, and the first of chicken. The size of a field is, or the size of a farm in the Mato Grosso can achieve 600,000 hectares. 600,000 hectares. In Brazil, you've got 2,000 planes to deliver the pesticides by the air, because it's easier to do it by the air, you know. At the same time, you can use in Brazil some pesticides totally forbidden in the EU.
This is really the horror movie that
And what is totally crazy is that most of the pesticides used by Brazilian people in Brazil, forbidden in EU, are produced in EU, sold by EU to Brazil people, and then Brazil people, they are cultivating, and then we bought the wheat, the chicken, the beef coming from Brazil. When I used to be a Minister of Agriculture, I had one big fight, which is named in France the clause mirror clause, meaning that if you cannot produce something in your area, you cannot accept to import those products in your area, even if it has been produced in other place in the world. It doesn't make sense. You cannot accept to import something that you are not authorized to produce in your own area. It doesn't make sense. But today, the WTO, today the liberalism, today the free trade agreement, they don't include enough clauses on that way, for sure. So, according to me, we have to change it. We have, if we want to go very, very quickly to tackle the climate change, we need to include in any trade agreement this carbon issue, this biodiversity issue, and what is the price of, let's say, environmental impact outside our boundaries? What is this price? And you cannot accept to import something, whatever is the product, without including this pricing of destroying the environment, for sure.
I think the topic of time that you mentioned, and we have, it's a bit annoying, the microphone. The issue of time, we have a discussion with Olivier, and what I always try to convince him is not either or. I think it's a fact that we don't change our habits. So betting on that is a very risky bet, my friend. And secondly, it's not all going to come from innovation, but let's remind that in March 2020, very few people would have expected that we would have a vaccine in 8 months. So I think these thoughts that we will not have fusion before 50 years, will not have quantum before 50 years, but that's your turf. I think we need to try.
Oh yeah, of course.
Do two things. Just one question to Julien and then to you, Olivier. This thing about the pesticides. I mean, WTO anyway is en mort cérébrale, to quote a famous leader. So it does not work anymore. What is the alternative? Is Europe, we heard from Olivier, from Bernard, at speed to make that happen? Do you get these laissez-passer quick enough? Are we doing these nudges in regulation quick enough? Are we applying that to our agricultural policy quick enough? Maybe, and Valérie, do you think that we are focusing enough efforts on these disruptive, maybe a few words on each of you, the concept of speed, is it a European competence? Definitely not today. How can we make it a European competence? Let's be positive. Valérie, you want to start? The green one works. The red one doesn't.
Maybe I can testify on something in terms of regulation that has been very high speed into the financial industry. I'm part of the financial industry, as you know, is highly regulated. It has been a before March 21 and an after March 21. And what the difference? The difference is that before March 21, the requirement we had from the regulator, the AMF in France, BaFin in Germany, whatever, were quite low, actually. We were sending a questionnaire per year to our portfolio company with about 20 questions, questions about gender, workforce, or whatever. Whenever we get back the answers, we put a 5-line paragraph into our website with consolidated figures, and this was the ESG policy, basically. And then, after March 21, the requirements have jumped hugely. So nowadays, it's not just a question of measurements. If you want to go to your LP with a, I don't want to use too much jargon, but it's the SFDR regulation. So even with a lower level, which is number 8, you have not only to measure those KPIs, and again, that's not only social, you have to put environmental KPIs and have objectives. And you are asked as an investor to educate your portfolio company, so to bring services, because as I said before, when I do invest in a startup, a 12-people startup, they don't even care about energy consumption when they are developing their SaaS application. So March 2021
was a game changer.
Yeah.
And prepare maybe 1 or 2 questions, 2 or 3 questions. I'll pick them up just after, please. Since we're running a bit out of time.
I think the regulation, we don't like it. Nobody likes regulation. I mean, you prefer not to have any regulation. But at least in the climate change and in many other fields, but in the climate change, if we do not have very clear regulations, then it will not be possible to handle with it, for sure. What's my position on that? We need a very clear regulation. What does it mean, clear? Visibility, clarity, and not to have the regulation just a couple of months before the regulation is going into force. You have mentioned SFDR. For the corporate sector, we have CSRD. Let's imagine that CSRD is more 1,000 metrics to be populated by corporate. And we do not know exactly at the time being what CSRD will look like, even if CSRD will enter into force next January. So, I mean, it's not suitable for companies. So first of all, we need a very clear regulation, and we need to be ambitious on those regulations for sure. But at the same time, if we have a very ambitious, restrictive, clear regulation for the EU area, at the same time, we need to be sure that we will remain with a kind of level playing field. What is impossible for companies, both in financial and corporate companies, if it's when you are playing in a field where your competitors don't have exactly the same rules. So this is a level playing field. Coming back to my example from Brazil, if you are an agriculture guy in EU, you cannot use some product, but at the same time you can have your competitor using exactly the same product coming in your own market without any boundaries and blah, blah, blah. It cannot work. So regulation, not protectionism, but level playing field, very, very important. And at the same time, investment, investment, and investment. The key point is investment. When I used to be a minister, I have to admit that you can put on the table some regulation without discussing enough with the private sector. They will be able or not to achieve the regulation? Do they have the investor to invest, to find a solution, and blah, blah, blah? Do we have any alternative, etc., etc.? So for me, the three key pillars are regulation, level playing field, and investment.
Olivier, and then please some questions.
I've got a small tidbit here. I think there's another issue. We should raise the stakes about science. There's a lack of trust of science in this world. It's a political issue, it's a media issue, it's an education issue. I'm not sure it can be fixed very quickly, but it also can be fixed with regulation. They're just saying, how many minutes do we have on science on TV for the general public in any country in Europe? I don't care about the US, it's even worse probably, but some stuff could be done to increase that trust, to increase education for both economics and the links between economics, climate, and science. There's a lot of things to do here. It's just an idea.
Leah, I promise I go back to you, but I would like really to open to the floor, and then I'll come back to you. Are there any questions for this stellar panel?
Okay, so just I wanted to actually build on this point that the science of climate change has been known for over 30 years, and it was the political will that was missing to act on it. I agree that it's not a problem that stops at the European border or anything else. So we need to build up this political will at the international level, and this education part is key. It's not part of the school systems here in France. People don't understand the terms. As you said, you can't see it. So we need a cultural change in order to have the behavioral change. And for me, the part that has been missing is not only just the finance, yes, the level playing field, but also educating people of what the risks are. What will their lives be looking like in 10 years from now, their children's lives? This is going to have dramatic impacts. Our lives are going to completely change. And we have to start educating people that to build up this political will.
Can I be just very optimistic, because I want you to leave this room with a very optimistic point of view. I think at the EU level we have clearly many champions in terms of innovative, in terms of new solution, in terms of knowledge regarding climate change and blah blah blah. So we have all the key points to become the first place around the world in terms of leading the battle against climate change. We just need to be sure that we will invest in, we will protect them, and we will have a very clear framework giving visibility to all those actors to be sure that they will be able to deliver. And what Olivier said, Luancy said this morning was, for me, very important. For sure, 20 or 30 years ago, all the innovation, or not all, but many innovation were coming from the public sector. I mean, 60 years ago. Today, it will come much more from the private sector than from the public sector. Not meaning that only from the private sector, but most of them will come from the private sector. So we need to give to those private sector all the capabilities to deliver with those innovative solutions.
Okay, we have one question. I would like to leave the floor for all of you to a final statement, maybe around how do we seize this opportunity. I think, Julien, you said it very clearly. How do we seize this opportunity to create European champions in climate? Maybe starting with Olivier, but you had a quick question.
Thank you. I just would like to bring a bit of controversy into this discussion, right? First of all, I'm just wondering how come that we are coming with all of these statements without this humility of the fact that there's many things that we don't know, right? So that, for instance, in France, we are opening new nuclear factory or power, right? And in Germany, they are closing some. It means that on obvious things, right, we don't have an agreement here, right? So how can we build any kind of regulation when we are at that level? That's first thing. The second thing is that I disagree with what you say, Julien, about the fact that we need to somewhat trade off our ambition with profit when we go into climate change. I think it's more the other way around. We need to think about how we can make it profitable. Right, so, and actually we are working right now with Microsoft on their PC business, right, so etc., to see how we can build a profit engine that is going to make it more profitable for Microsoft and at the same time more sustainable, like by having a device as a services and sharing devices, etc., which is making it more profitable actually for Microsoft and at the same time better for the climate. So my point is that instead of trying to trade off profit, why don't we work on something that is actually stressing our imagination to see how we can build a world that is more profitable and sustainable, as opposed to be an antagonism?
Thank you, Laurent. I will let Julien answer. Maybe I'll take a second one, and then we'll take a... Can we still have a few minutes?
We'll just make time for that. So I'll make it quick. Jean-Christophe Part, one of the co-founders of the ECA. Just two quick questions to our excellent panelists. One is, haven't we maybe reached the limits of our European ecosystem governance? Because we're seeing that mission economy is something they have never heard about, apparently, and it's very difficult to implement. And the other question is, I mean, can we afford to continue down this route of having nation states that are actually hampering our ecosystem's development?
Bon, I take this role as a chair of this panel. The second point is very, it's a huge debate, but first question on trading, I think Julien wanted to answer. Olivier, you wanted to give a point maybe on the first one? On the,
to him.
Also to him. Okay, who would like to answer the second question? So then start, Olivier.
I'm taking him. Just based on what I'm doing, the QEI can create some business advantage for European players, because we think that European players will be more sensitive to that energetic issue of those technologies, and we think that with having a good community of people working together, probably also with European projects, we can bring a competitive advantage to, for example, Candela in France, IQM in Finland, who's going to talk this afternoon, and those companies can benefit from that initiative. And the other thing is we found out that just with creating that initiative, we nudged the market, because it forced large players, including American players, to express their views on that topic, which otherwise they wouldn't have expressed. So we changed with nudging. It's a small market. Quantum computing is a very small market. It's a narrow market. But it's interesting to see how just a kind of informal NGO initiative can change the landscape and push people to move things around, and push people to collaborate more, and push people to maybe also at the European level be more competitive. So there's a connection.
And just to answer very quickly, first of all, what was the meaning of my sentence? It was that you cannot tell everyone, okay, let's invest in the climate change because it will be profitable. It's not true. It can be true for certain sectors, for sure, and the example you gave, the right one. I've got many examples in the field of my society, my company, and blah, blah, blah. It can be true. It can be true. But it's not always the case. On the real estate, it will not be the case. It's not true. On the agriculture, it's not the case, or it's the case, the only way is the economy of scale. If you compare, for just one very short example, if you compare a cow farm in France than in Uruguay, Argentina, or Brazil, the carbon footprint of a cow farm in France is higher than the one in Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina. Why? Because the average size in France is 60 cow, and in Brazil it's 8. Probably you have seen this incredible image coming from US where a farm was on fire with 80,000 cows inside. The carbon footprint was better. It doesn't make sense. So it's not always the case. And coming back to EU governance or the fact that we are not always aligned, I used to attend many EU meetings as a minister. This is totally amazing. When you enter the room, you are not aligned on the main objective. You can spend one day, one night, another day, another night, but at the end of the day, you reach an agreement. You reach an agreement. Totally crazy. This is this Robert Schuman statement we have celebrated beginning of this week, 70 years old. When he was speaking about EU, he was speaking about this creative effort. EU building is a creative effort. We need to be in this creative effort with all the member states. And at the end of the day, it works. It's not perfect, for sure, but it works. We have to keep it.
Fantastic. So thank you to this panel. Thank you, Julien, for these words. And thank you for your attention. I think we're on a good track to build a European climate champions. So thank you.